Okay, I'm starting a new series and it's called The Good, The Okay, and The Ugly. And essentially, it is going to be somewhat of a weekly wrap up style where I'm going to be talking about all the books I have read in the past 1 week or 2 weeks or whatever time period I set myself up for. But it's just going to be organized in this category. Now, for the year of 2023, I want to be a little bit more positive on my channel. I feel that my channel is often weighed down by a lot of negative reviews towards books that I've read. Sometimes I just have a tendency to keep picking duds. I'm not actively hating on some of these books, but they just don't really fit the standard that I do have for what I consider to be a good book. So then it just gets, a little bit boring on my channel when all I'm doing is bashing books. Now, with this video, I feel like we're leaning a little bit more towards the negative side once again, but hopefully you guys will find that when I talk about books that I actually enjoy, that's the rewarding part of this video. So I think we're going to start off with The Ugly first and just kind of work our way to the top of like, these are my recommendations that I've read this week. So the first book that I did read that I wanted to just slap it and give it a 1 out of 5 stars and just throw it across the street was this one called The Sinful King by Claire Contreras. And basically, I just did not like any of the characters in this book, and it makes me very disappointed because this was one of the indie romances that I did buy last year, and indie romances are not cheap in Canada, so I would have liked it if I didn't waste so much money on this book. But essentially, it follows our hero, who is the Prince of France, and he is going to be the King of France, obviously. His life is already planned out for him. He knows who his fiance is, and he has to follow all the rules and regulations the government puts him out for. But what happens is that during like a summer vacation, like in this like really nice area, he bumps into this like really beautiful woman who just happens to be our heroine. And our heroine isn't of like in a royal family or anything, but she is not poor. She is part of like a family that makes a lot of money, likes to hang out with the royals, but they're not royal themselves. And they end up hooking up, and she loses her virginity to him, and they think that that's the end of that until like a couple years later they meet each other again, and she is actually the wedding planner, and she is planning his wedding where they both go behind the bride's back and continuously cheat. And like, she's still upset of why like the prince wants to choose to marry the person that the whole government designated for him to marry, and she doesn't understand his thought process. Meanwhile, he is a scumbag himself because he's cheating, and he wants to go through with the wedding even though that he knows like his true feelings are towards our heroine, who is the wedding planner. And I just thought the book was just unnecessarily messy. I thought that the character flaws were running too deep for me, and I just thought every character was either annoying or flawed in the worst possible way, and there was no redemption arc. So I gave this 1 out of 5 stars. I do not recommend to read this book, and I don't even want to read book number 2 in this duology. I did give another book a 1 out of 5 stars, and this one's called Ruins of Temptation. It's book number 4 in the Corium University series by C. Hallman and J.L. Beck. Now, I've read C. Hallman before, I've read J.L. Beck before, but I don't know what was wrong with this series. I just never liked book number 1, and so when I saw that book number 4 could be sort of read as a standalone, I jumped at the chance of it. And essentially it is a taboo romance involving our hero, who is the headmaster of the university, and then our heroine, who is a student at the university. Basically, our heroine kind of grew up in a really shitty upbringing. Her family was just neglectful, and she just was never really tied to what her father was doing. And her father essentially was kind of like the mafia boss, and he was running like a series of underground crimes, and he was just doing the worst things possible, and while ignoring our heroine. When our heroine gets looped up with her father's mistakes in the past, she ends up getting kidnapped, and she gets end up held captive, and the headmaster, who is our hero, actually keeps her under observation in his house, and he is essentially the bully. This is kind of like a bully romance where the headmaster bullies her and makes her life a living hell, and he does it for a purpose, but she doesn't know why. and she keeps trying to explain to him that she is innocent, that he got the wrong person, but he's not willing to hear it. And honestly, I thought the book was super boring. It just didn't have like the emotional pull that I was expecting it to have with a bully romance. There was definitely not enough romance in the book to make me feel like even like attached to the characters. Like both characters were just like whatever, and I just ultimately felt bad for our heroine because she honestly didn't do anything wrong and she got punished for it. And it was just like a really messy book. Gave it 1 out of 5 stars. Do not recommend, and I probably won't go back and read the series. But there were a couple of books I did give 2 out of 5 stars, and one of them is this one called Love the Way You Kiss Me by Amelia Wilde and Willow Winters. Now, I think I've read Willow Winters before, but not that much, and I did read Amelia Wilde, and I do like her books. So I was curious about this one because it had a really dark aesthetic cover, and I thought that it would be something that is dark romance that I would really enjoy. Now, what I didn't expect was the confusion when I walked into this book. It felt like I was reading book number 3 in a series. So it started off with our heroine who was kidnapped, I think, and she was probably tortured. And then now she is in court trying to prosecute the person who did this to her. And then like there's like this team of bodyguards slash like lawyers that are helping her and defending her. And then obviously our hero is like assigned to protect her. So I would be thinking like, okay, there's like some action involved, there's some mystery, some intrigue. There's definitely a lot of mystery because I still don't know what's happening in this book, and I read it. And essentially our heroine, or we have a POV where somebody is just like obsessed with our hero, I think. And then it gets really confusing because our heroine does not sound like a heroine anymore, and she actually starts sounding like the villain. And the synopsis didn't help either. It was like one of those books that you find on Amazon that have like the most obscure synopsis ever, and you're just getting more and more frustrated as you read the book. And lots of people gave this 4 out of 5 stars, but I just don't understand. And then when they moved on to like the second book, they're like, oh yeah, like it totally makes sense now. And I know that book number 1 ends off of a cliffhanger, and it just was so frustrating. So I gave it 2 out of 5 stars and did not continue with the duology series, and I was very disappointed by this book. All right, so the next book that was like a 2 out of 5 stars for me was Hold the Forevers by K.A. Lindy. Now, I don't think I've read any K.A. Lindy book before, so this was kind of like my first book, but I've seen her books floating around on Amazon and I was intrigued by it. But I should have known from reading the synopsis that I wouldn't like this book because this one is a love triangle, but it essentially deals with our heroine in love with her 2 ex-boyfriends. Our first hero and our heroine met during like high school. They had a great relationship. Everything was going well, except for the fact that our first hero would never tell his parents that he was in a serious relationship and that she meant a lot to him and that he was never willing to fight for her ever. So they had to end the relationship, obviously, because like you don't want to date someone who's ashamed of you. Then she goes off to college and then she meets another person who is definitely in love with her, who treats her a lot differently, but also at the same time, they're dealing with like the pressures of college applications, of finding your first job, of doing all this stuff. And then they get a little bit nasty with each other because, you know, in high stress situations, obviously you're not always the nicest person, which is very understandable. But what ends up happening is that the ex from the past high school life comes in back into the picture, and then now our college boyfriend hero, our second hero, is a little bit shaken up by it. A lot of jealousy happens and it gets really dramatic and it gets really messy. And then now, fast forward, she is having a wedding. She finally decided who she's going to marry, but obviously it does not go the way it's planned. And it's like this story told from past and present, and you're supposed to fall in love with each hero. You're supposed to see the good in each hero, but why did I feel like both heroes were not right for her and that she should not marry any of them? So 2 out of 5 stars. I just did not like our heroes. And to be honest, I don't really see amazing qualities in our heroine anyways to make these 2 guys like fall madly in love with her. I have a challenge for myself for this year to read one physical book each week, and that's just because a lot of my books on my shelves don't have audiobooks, and in order for me to read them, I actually have to force myself to read a physical book. Anyways, my physical book that I read this week was called Sex, Murder, and a Double Latte. It was a book that I picked up at a thrift store, and it was intriguing. It was romantic suspense. It had mystery in it, and I just thought it sounded really interesting because our heroine is actually a mystery writer, or like she's a romantic suspense writer, and she starts realizing that somebody might be stalking her. So she gets a little worried, and she decides that she's going to become a character in her own book, which is like a detective slash sleuth. And she kind of meets a lot of different people, and then she realizes that a lot of heinous crimes are happening around like the city and around the country is tied to her, and it's like this like huge mess. It was fun. It was like a chick lit novel. It was easy to read. It was cozy a lot of the times. Our hero, who is very dark and mysterious, is accused of murder and accused of the crimes, and our heroine is like scared and frightened because she still doesn't know who the possible suspects are. And so it was good, but until the end, where I just felt that it was just horrible. And it just kind of showed what kind of character our heroine was, and it grew extremely frustrating. I just did not like what she chose to do. Essentially, she lied to the law enforcement, and she made a bigger story than it really was. And the repercussions of lying to a law enforcement during an investigation is obviously really severe, because you're putting like the lives of like the accused in jeopardy, and these people can actually get put in jail if you just like lie in court. So I just didn't agree with her, and I ended up giving this one a 2 out of 5 stars. I was very disappointed by the choices the heroine made towards the end, because honestly, it was like a solid 3.5 out of 5 stars until she decided to lie. Okay, so moving on to our 3 out of 5 star books. Honestly, there's this book that I read, and I honestly can't remember too much about this book. This book is called Thirst by Carmen Rosales, and essentially it is a bully romance once again. But like all bully romances, they kind of like all blur together in my head because it always follows the same plot. It always follows a heroine who just finds herself moving into like a college or a university. They're the new student, they're the prey on campus, because everybody's always intrigued by the new person and they want to get to know her story. She's very innocent, she's very sweet, but then she's also very strong-willed, and she stands up for herself. And essentially our hero, who is kind of like a gothish character, he dresses all black, he's moody, he kind of runs the college. And so when he sees her, he wants to get to know her, and then obviously some bullying ensues, and then he can't stay away from her no matter how much he tries. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. It was an entertaining read. It got me through the long weekend that we had just now. And will I read book number 2? Probably not, because I don't read books in the next series unless it is like a 4 out of 5 stars or a 5 out of 5 stars, or it drops off on a cliffhanger that I actually find intriguing and that I want to figure out and want to know how the whole series ends. Now, the next book that I read that was a 3 out of 5 stars is this one called P.S. I Hate You by Jane Anthony. And this one is another bully romance, but this one involves forced close proximity, because our heroine, she grew up with like a really nice lifestyle thanks to her mom getting into crypto very earlier on. And during the crypto boom, her mom and her family made a lot of money. But what happened was, when the crypto crashed, they lost all the money, and then her mom subsequently killed herself. She now has to move back to the small town that her mom once grew up in to live with her mom's best friend, and to also room with her mom's best friend's son, who is our bully and who is our hero. And basically they go to the same school, and he treats her like garbage because she is perceived to be this like rich, snooty girl who just doesn't understand like chores, who just doesn't understand like living an average life. But honestly, she is not snobby, she is not snooty, and she knows how to do chores, she knows how to be a polite person, and she's actually a very good person overall. It's just that our hero is very judgmental of her and holds a lot of like prejudice against her, which is like completely unfair, and you feel really bad for the heroine most of the times because she doesn't deserve it. And then obviously, because it's forced close proximity, they fall in love, and it was okay. The only reason why I think it was like not a 4 out of 5 stars for me was because there was a lot of grammatical mistakes and the writing was just not good. I felt the writing sometimes was more telling than showing. I felt the writing felt stale a lot of times. I felt like our author was writing for a younger generation and it felt really forced using like the language and slang that they included in it. Like just like the conversations didn't even flow that well. So it was a 3 out of 5 stars for me. And I actually debated whether or not I would read another Jane Anthony book, but definitely it's on my radar, but it's not going to be next up on the list. I'm going to read her whole backlist. It's like okay. So overall, 3 out of 5 stars. It was sweet in a lot of the moments, so that's what counts, I guess. So the next book that I did read that I gave a 3 out of 5 stars to was The Kraken Sacrifice by Katie Robert. Now, I've been putting this book off for like a couple months now since it was published because I really liked The Dragon's Bride, I believe it's called, and I just wanted to have some time for like a cozy romance. Honestly, I knew it was going to be a little bit disappointing when I saw the reviews and it was sitting at a 3.5 out of 5. So I had no really high expectations walking into the book as soon as I saw those reviews. And this one was just like, I didn't hate it, but I just felt like it was a very mediocre book. Like it was meh at best. I didn't like our heroine because I felt that our heroine was really weak. Like I get it, like if you're really damaged, then you obviously have really low self-esteem, but this girl had like extreme low self-esteem and she like just kept like putting her defense mechanisms up and it was very frustrating, and then our hero wasn't really that supportive of her a lot of the times, and it just there was just like no moments in the book where I felt like that they could have had an opportunity to really get to know each other, to fall in love. So when they did like, you know, like the physical things and then they started speaking emotional words, I just didn't believe it at all because I just felt like they never had enough time together in the book to even get to know each other. And honestly, I'm still excited to read more books by Katie Robert and more books in this series called A Deal with a Demon series. Okay, so finally the book that was actually good and that is worth mentioning and that is a recommendation is actually a book from Katie Robert once again, but it's not like a monster romance. It's a contemporary romance and it's called Falling for His Best Friend. And basically our heroine has like this family history that could mean that she could develop cancer later on in life, and she doesn't want to waste a second longer and she just wants to have a family, and she doesn't have a boyfriend, she doesn't have a partner, so she's just gonna go to a sperm bank and she's just gonna get pregnant that way. But our hero, who is her best friend, hears about the story and he doesn't like the idea of it because he thinks that, you know, somebody should be in her life helping her take care of the baby, and that somebody should be there to be like financially supportive too as well. So he actually volunteers as tribute and he volunteers to be the sperm donor. And she's like, it's kind of weird because you're my best friend and I secretly have feelings for you, but okay, yeah, like your ideas make sense. They think that it's just going to be an easy relationship with no emotion. Obviously, it's really silly because these two people are walking into this plan just being straight up delusional that emotions are not going to be involved, especially when you guys are creating a human being. So it was silly in that sense, but it was really cute because our hero was just so in love with her, but he was just very afraid to kind of tell her how he truly felt because he was scared of rejection. And it was just an overall a really solid novel. And I'm excited to read other books in the series too as well. But anyways, that is it for all the books I've read this week that I felt that were worth mentioning, that books that you should probably avoid and books that you need to add to your TBR cart. But hopefully you like the format of this new video and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.